Hi everyone, my name is Ruben and I'm here to talk to you today about my master's dissertation titled Cycling and Sustainable Urban Development in Post-COVID-19 Leeds. Before we begin, I'd like to highlight the three most relevant SDGs to this research, which are SDG 3, Good Health, 11, Sustainable Cities, and 13, Climate Action. Arguably, few sectors have been more impacted by the pandemic than transport. Mandates to stay home have fundamentally reshaped transport decision-making. For a short period, our streets were practically empty. The sudden removal of traffic made the pollution, noise, and danger of our car-filled streets overtly visible. When examining DFT data, I saw every mode decline following March 2020, except for one, cycling. With millions on furlough looking to exercise, quiet streets, restricted transit, and exceptionally nice weather, it seemed like this created the conditions for the boost that cycling has needed for decades. Punctuated equilibrium theory hypothesizes that discourse is often characterized by long periods of stability, punctuated by significant shocks, which create socio-political turbulence that disrupts a policy equilibrium, creating a window of opportunity for new perspectives to flourish. It's hard to imagine a shock to the status quo greater than COVID-19. Over summer 2020, the DFT announced a gear change funding scheme, allocating $2 billion to support local authorities in making cycling more attractive, safe and accessible, and it seemed like Britain was legitimately ready to embrace these changes. I wanted to find out what this meant for Leeds, how cycling can be encouraged at the city scale, who would be impacted, and importantly, how this might impact our cities and travel habits after the pandemic to create quieter, safer, sociable and more sustainable streets without coercive lockdowns. I devised three key research questions, as shown on the slide, and I conducted 13 semi-structured interviews with Leeds-based experts from the organisations shown. I then analysed the data using in vivo to establish themes. To better understand the research questions, the data was split into four key stages shown in the framework. As this conference is focusing on leaving nobody behind, I will discuss the provisions in terms of their potential to maximise accessibility. Segregated cycle infrastructure can benefit a niche group of cyclists, but will do little to include new users. For example, the City Connect superhighway connecting Leeds and Bradford was a useful tool for a limited number of confident cyclists. However, it did little to entice new users as the subjective experience was overlooked, as cyclists had to endure heavy traffic and the associated externalities. Respondents indicated that more traffic-free routes in pleasant environments through parks and along canals would be more successful. However, infrastructure alone will only entice existing cyclists already comfortable with riding and perceive cycling to be achievable and normal. Therefore, hard provisions must be accompanied by soft schemes to ensure new users have the equipment, confidence, skills and motivation to ride. These soft provisions must be at a range of scale. Large citywide events like Leeds' Let's Ride can make cycling seem exciting and draw attention from the masses. However, bottom-up community-run events in neighbourhoods, schools and workplaces must also be provided to create a sustained interest amongst new riders. New policies must of course incentivise cycling, however this is only half the battle. There must be policies to actively disincentivise driving. For example, through LTN schemes and driving space curtailing, which have been implemented in Leeds over the last year. Implementation. This research considered a range of barriers and enablers, evidenced in the framework. However, for the brevity of this overview, I'll quickly discuss the three considerations that are directly related to the pandemic. Firstly, the inherent localization from forced lockdowns abruptly shifted urban lifestyles from a commuter-based model to a focus on neighbourhood services. This inherently made cycling more feasible, and welcoming the safer streets, both policymakers and regular people began to consider how these desirable neighbourhood conditions could be replicated through free choice rather than government mandates. Secondly, the DFT's gear change scheme empowered local authorities with renewed confidence to accelerate bold and experimental policies they'd been hesitant to enact before the pandemic. As one respondent put it, they felt they were backed by the system to implement car-hostile infrastructure. Finally, COVID-19 impacted policy in two key ways. Firstly, the restrictions on public gatherings meant that neighbourhood consultation was moved to the virtual realm, causing many residents to feel excluded from new policies, which was one of the primary causes of the vocal backlash received by the council. Secondly, the funding from gear change had extremely tight timescales attached to it, meaning much of the consultation was carried out retrospectively, further contributing to local perceptions of undemocratic top-down changes in their neighbourhoods. Impacts. Rather than go into specific detail here, the images show how restricting spaces for vehicles and giving it to people can create beneficial social outcomes alongside the obvious environmental ones. The city centre has been possibly transformed into an area of sociable alfresco dining and booming economic activity by creatively reutilising reclaimed space. Impact distribution. It's no secret that cycling is perceived as an exclusive sport and has been referred to as a new golf, relating to its connotations with white, middle-aged, affluent, lycra-clad males. There is a complex range of socio-economic factors that contribute to these perceptions. However, one such reason for this stereotype is the conditions that urban cyclists have been forced to endure. Cyclists in Leeds and most British cities must be risk-tolerant. They are expected to traverse the road alongside their motorised counterparts, requiring quick reactions and a nerve of steel. This creates a perception that cycling requires specialist equipment, fitness, knowledge and skills, causing many to feel excluded. Fortunately, accelerating the provisions discussed above alongside specialist disability infrastructure can contribute to normalising cycling and making it more inclusive. Cities like Copenhagen and Amsterdam, which have superb infrastructure and comprehensive sub-provisions, experience a very even balance of cyclists between age, race, gender and income. However, even with superb infrastructure, there will still be a sizable demographic that feel excluded from cycling. Campaign groups like British Cycling and Sustrans allocate additional funding and attention to marginalised priority neighbourhoods to invite communities into the policy process. The slide shows a diagram to show some of my recommendations to map how Leeds can transition from cycling to some, to many, to all. Feel free to pause this slide now. The rapid and transformative changes enacted by both national and local authorities suggests that the localising effects of COVID-19 have acted as a catalyst for positive change. However, the pandemic has been a time of grief and loneliness, therefore the collective craving for normality could result in a dash back to car-centric business as usual. City councils have utilised this opportunity to permanently reshape city infrastructure. However, only time will tell whether similar transformations have occurred in the hearts and minds of their inhabitants.